Hello. My research project was over white nose syndrome. I've titled it A Battle to Save the Bats because it really is an uphill battle to try to get rid of white nose syndrome in many of these bat species. So, what is white nose syndrome? It's a fungus, or it's caused by a fungus called Pseudogymnoascus destructans. It's a mouthful. I don't know if I can say that again. The first case in North America was documented in 2006 in House Cave near Albany, New York. So 2006 makes it a relatively new pathogen, at least for North America. It has been seen in Europe and Asia prior to this, but for North America, it is relatively new. And it threatens many bat species to extinction in North America, and it's been cited as one of the worst epidemics in wildlife history. And as you can see here, the fungus that grows on its nose is why it gets its name white nose syndrome, because of the white fungus that's growing there, obviously. So how is it transmitted? It's primarily through bat-to-bat contact. As you can see in this picture, they like to get real cuddly with one another during hibernation. And you can even spot on their noses that P. destructans that's growing there. And it can also be transmitted through mites, specifically from the genus Penturnix. And these mites can live on the bats all year round. Um, and there's even been correlations that show amount of mites to severity of P. destructans, which is kind of an interesting thing to note. And then they can also pick it up through organic material that already has P. destructans that are within the hibernaculum that they choose to reside in, whether it be caves or abandoned warehouses or abandoned mines. So what does it do exactly? It causes the bats to wake up too early and too often during hibernation. This is the primary way that you get bat deaths. And so bats only have a limited amount of fat reserves. And if they wake up too early, too often, they reduce those fat reserves to a point where they can no longer maintain body heat and maintain nutrients, causing them to eventually die. Um, and another thing that white nose syndrome does is it creates lesions and consumes the bat's skin. As you can see in these pictures, you can see where the bat's wings have been completely deformed and kind of torn apart. And this in turn causes wing patterns to or flight patterns to change and behavioral patterns to change due to this. And there's even been cases where they can't even fly in the snow because of the damage that's been done to them. So they end up having to do this wing walking, and this causes long-term effects as well, even past hibernation, to where they might not be able to be as good of predators and not being able to maintain these fat reserves or gain fat reserves for the following hibernation period. So why is it so destructive for bats? It's because whenever bats are in hibernation, their body temperatures go down to the perfect temperature for WNS to grow. And so that's between 3 to 15 degrees Celsius and a relative humidity of 90%. So this is especially bad in caves. And so due to this, the body conditions, hibernaculum conditions, P. destructans grows exponentially within these bats. So is there any spillover potential for humans specifically? No. I've only seen it or only read it in bats and in those mites from the genus Penturnix. However, there has been research shown that WNS and coronaviruses enhance the replication and severity of one another. So with that, human practices such as logging, urbanization, and hunting are reducing suitable bat habitat as well. So the combination of all these could mean spillover of coronaviruses or other viruses that potentially harm humans. So an interesting and potentially scary thought to think about. But there are some solutions, some hope for us in terms of white nose syndrome. And one of these is vaccination kind of that induces an antifungal response in bats. And the study that did this showed that vaccinated bats stayed white nose syndrome free about 75 days longer than non-vaccinated bats, which is an exciting sort of discovery. And then the other one was one study that's using a probiotic bacterium to fight white nose syndrome, and their survival rates increased from 8.4% to 46.2%. And it allowed the bats to stay asleep longer and have a more regular hibernation cycle, which allowed them to survive throughout the winter. And whenever I started looking into white nose syndrome, I thought all bats hibernated in mass. But it turns out a large proportion hibernate individually or just in small groups, which is important when thinking about transmission rates and how it might not affect all bats. So some might end up being able to stay free. I mean, it's still a bad disease in terms of transmission rate, but hopefully, due to some of these behaviors of certain bat species, it won't be as bad and wipe out every single bat in North America. So, yes, WNS is a very scary, frightening disease with a lot of potential for harm, which can kill up to 95% of bat populations that hibernate together in mass in certain areas and for certain more susceptible species. And it's important that we try to save these bats. They're an essential part of our ecosystem, our environment, to maintain a healthy, environment, because they're important pollinators and they're great for controlling insect populations as top-down predators. And so hopefully with vaccinations and better land use, we can save all these bat species, especially in North America where it's been hitting us hardest. So thank you for listening.